Hi everybody! So today's video is going to be about listening and how we listen to music. So I've made you a listening guide, a guide to listening, to help you listen. And the piece I'm going to use today to talk about listening is called Rimsky-Korsakov's Le Coq d'Or. So, I like to think about listening in 3 steps: pre-listening, during listening, and post-listening. So for pre-listening, it's just a very easy process. It's thinking about things that you already know in your own head, like things that you already might know about the piece or don't know about the piece. Just kind of drawing awareness and attention to what you feel like you know and what you feel like you don't. And you don't need to do any research for pre-listening, so super easy. So let's get started on that. So, do I know this piece? And that's always the first question I ask myself. What experience do I have with this piece? So no, I actually have not heard it before, and I also haven't heard anyone talk about it extensively before. So I imagine that maybe it's not as popular, or maybe it's just a genre that I'm not as familiar with. The next question, do I know anything about the composer? And it turns out I actually know quite a lot about this composer. I know that he wrote Capriccio Espagnol and Scheherazade, 2 of my favorite orchestral composers, and both pieces use a lot of solo clarinet, and they're really hard, and they use a lot of cadenza-like material. Both pieces tell a story and are considered programmatic. He was a Russian composer during the Romantic era, and again, the composer of this piece is Rimsky-Korsakov. So as I listen to this piece, or as I'm getting ready to listen to this piece, the reason I think about the composer is because often the same people will compose either in the same style as previous pieces, or they'll compose with the same intention. And so these are a couple things that I know about this particular composer and might help me when I go to listen to this other piece, might help me understand the context of the piece better. Our next question is, what does the title of the piece suggest to me? So luckily I know a little bit of French, and the piece translates, the title, Le Coq d'Or, translates to either the golden cockerel or the golden rooster. And so that maybe means that the piece is a little cocky or full of itself. But also, the title of the piece is French, and I know that the composer is Russian. So that'll be something to look into as I listen to this piece. There's a picture of that golden rooster, the golden cockerel. So why am I listening to this piece? I think it's always really important to consider why you're listening to something. Like, is it an assignment? Is it something that you just, you were on YouTube and you were looking stuff up and it's something that just came up and you decided you want to listen to it? So I think it's really important to think about why. For me, it's because it was on a list of clarinet excerpts that shows up on orchestral lists, but also I chose it out of all of the pieces I didn't know because I love the composer. Who is listening, how am I listening, and who is performing, and am I watching something? This is always important to know, because if you're listening to perhaps a YouTube recording of a middle school orchestra, a middle school orchestra might be really, really great, but they might not have as much training as professionals. Or if you're listening to a professional group, but it's not a professional group that you've ever heard of, or it's not a professional group that's very well respected, that's something to think about too. So with this particular listening, when I was listening to it, it was with YouTube, and I was watching a score, and I know where the clarinet big part fits in, and it's right at the beginning, and it's performed by the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, and I know that the conductor, whose last name is pronounced Yarwi, I think, is well respected and famous, and they're professionals performing, so that's important to know. Okay, so what were my expectations of the piece before I heard it? So I was guessing that the piece was going to be lively and full of solos, and I think it'll probably be programmatic, and I think it won't be pastoral. Pastoral means like a countryside feel, and the reason I wrote that was because the golden cockerel is about a rooster, about an animal, but it's a golden cockerel. It's not just any old rooster. So even though the title references an animal, I don't think it's going to be all scenic and beautiful. Alright, do I know the genre of this piece, and if so, do I enjoy the genre? The genre is classical, and more specifically from the Romantic era. This is my favorite era of classical music. I love romantic music. It's just so beautiful and so evocative, and it's my absolute favorite. Alright, so now we've come to during listening. And this is the part where we've got to do a bit of extra work, and all it involves is just listening to the music. So as you can hear here in the background, I've got the piece that I was listening to going in the background, so you can kind of get an idea about what I'm talking about as I talk about it. So, during listening, can you hear your instrument group or voice part? Not too much when the whole orchestra is playing, but extensively in the solos. So it's good to know, like, is your instrument or your voice part super duper important in this piece? Is it kind of background? Like, is it, like, if you hear a rock group, like, where the singer is the lead and the drummer is kind of in the background, are you the drummer or the singer? And that's kind of important. You've got to know how important your part is. So for me, I feel like the clarinet part is not that important when everyone is playing, but it's very important in the solo sections. So what's the genre of this piece? Can you tell? Is it what you were expecting? And what kinds of music are you hearing? So I heard a lot of solos and cadenzas, and that's kind of what I expected. I heard that trumpet call in the beginning with the second trumpet adding in. There are lots of descending 16th notes with the motive starting on beat 2. It's shockingly calm and still. I was kind of expecting a piece about a rooster to be super energetic just the whole time, and it didn't seem that way either. Also, the scales don't seem to be major or minor, and there's a huge clarinet solo. So it's kind of cool if you can tell that perhaps the piece isn't exactly what you expected it to be, or it is exactly what you expected it to be. And then you can, as you listen to more and more music, you'll be able to see if your expectations kind of match what the reality is. Also, I think those scales that aren't major or minor can mean that this music might be from a different culture. So that's also something to keep in mind. So is there a distinct melody? What do you come away hearing? So this piece that you're going to hear just a bit of is a 30-minute piece. And so it's not like I came away from the piece hearing like one particular melody like you would hear when you listen to Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. But I did leave the piece having a couple of ideas of what I was hearing. So I was hearing a lot of regal and floating melodies, and then they were interrupted by woodwind lines or pecking notes. And when I hear a whole bunch of different scenes in music, I kind of think of it as a dance, like it could be a ballet or something. So that's another thing to think about. Is this music the same the whole way through, or does it change a lot? Is there something that you can hear or learn from it as you're going? And for me, I really felt like I was hearing someone like telling a story. I just wasn't sure what that story was. Do I enjoy what I hear? So yeah, I actually really did like what I heard for the most part, but again, it was hard for me to tell what that story was. I thought there might be like kings and queens involved, and it's a very regal sounding music, but I couldn't quite tell how a rooster played in. So, post-listening. This is where you've got to do just a bit of research. And actually, I feel like it really enhances the experience of listening to the music if you are able to kind of have an idea of what's going on. Especially for me in this piece, I was like, what does a rooster have to do with anything? So it might be nice to kind of look that up and see what information I can find. When you're searching about like facts about music, I would recommend doing a very simple Wikipedia search. You don't need to go in and do like a ton of research. You're not writing a paper or anything. It's just for a little bit of context. So honestly, I think one Wikipedia page on the piece ought to do the trick for you. So, questions I might ask myself post-listening is, if I were going to play this piece, what would I be worried about? What sounds fun? And, oh my gosh, the runs at the beginning of the clarinet excerpt I would need to work on so hard and there's nowhere to breathe, but I think it would be fun because the piece is like mysterious but also like royal feeling, and I feel like it would be so much fun to portray the story of this piece. So when I think about how I feel about music, I actually kind of use this emotion wheel, and I think like in the inside of that circle you can see mad, scared, joyful, powerful, peaceful, sad. I feel like those are words that we use all the time, like happy and sad, and then as you go out into the wheel, you can see more and more specific ways to describe how you're feeling. And so I like to use this sometimes as well as a tool to kind of describe how I feel about a certain piece of music. So, of course, that brings us to the question, how did the music make you feel? And I said there were parts of the music that made me feel uplifted and hopeful and alive, and there were other parts that I felt like someone was telling me a story. We call that narrative. And in other parts of the piece, I felt like there was some amount of unease, like something exciting was going to happen. And that's kind of how I've been feeling about this piece. Listening to it and thinking about it, I just feel like something is going to happen. And someone is telling me this just wild and interesting and intriguing story, and I just want to know what that story is. So, in which year was this piece written? It's good to know the year because, as you'll see in a second, the piece was written in 1907 but premiered in 1909 after the composer died. And so then you're going to see what are 3 facts about the time period in which it was written. So during this time, in Russia, pieces had to pass through a censorship agency to be allowed to be performed. The Mighty Five, which Rimsky-Korsakov was part, was writing Russian nationalistic music, and also the famous poet Alexander Pushkin was writing. So what this means to me is that this piece is probably a Russian story. It's a piece where, when I found this out, I realized that it was probably something that Rimsky-Korsakov maybe he had to like write the title in French so that it could pass through the censorship agency. But also, it was kind of odd because he was writing Russian nationalistic music at the time. Music that, like, reminded him of his country. Music that made him feel strong about his heritage. And so, those were really interesting and important facts as I did a little bit more digging. And also, all of this information I found out within the first paragraph of a Wikipedia article. It didn't take me more than 5 minutes to learn. So, as I was looking through this, I realized that this piece was actually an opera, and it was staged in France, and so it was cool, and that's kind of how it got its French title when it's performed in France. So if I listen to the piece again, I'll probably watch the opera so that I can see exactly what's occurring. An opera is like a big musical, but just more singing and less dialogue, and the singing style is quite different. And so this piece is actually about a Tsar and a Tsarita, and they fall in love, and there's this prize of this golden rooster, and then the golden rooster plays a part in their relationship, and then there's just all this storytelling, and there's this whole and I don't want to give it away so that when you look it up and you watch the opera, if you want to, you'll be able to see what it is for yourself. But it's just fantastic storytelling, and the Tsar Don Don, it's these 3 acts of this opera telling us what happens in the story, and it reminded me of 1001 Arabian Nights, kind of these royal stories of kings and queens and tsars and things like that, and it just told me so much more about the piece that I was listening to when I looked up that very easy fact. So again, if you want to look more into the story of this piece after kind of listening to it in the background, you totally should, because it's a great piece and I didn't want to give everything away. But if you want to get a little bit more advanced into your listening, one thing that I would do is score study. I would take a look at the part if you have it. You can probably find a lot of parts, but and actually some of you could probably find it on Smart Music right now. You could probably find some parts, or I don't know if they'd have to be assigned, but something to think about. But if you're looking at orchestral pieces like I am right now, you can look for a score and kind of see, like, can you tell what music is representing which character? Things like that. And so I really like looking up all of this information. And the information that I looked up post-listening, again, it only took me about 5 minutes to find the information. And it was just, like, in the first 2 paragraphs of a Wikipedia article. So it's just super fun for me to listen to a piece and then to, like, have all these questions about the piece, and then to have my questions answered. I just think it's so much fun to have that experience. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about listening or what I do when I listen to music, let me know. Alright, bye!